Welcome everybody to the first of this term's research conversations, when as always we'll have two conversations about very different things, starting with Professor Alain George, who is the IMP Professor of Islamic Art and Architecture at the Calligraphy Research Center here in the faculty. Having trained here with his master's and his doctorate, gone then to teach in Beirut and then in Edinburgh, and been back here since 2017. And discussing his work with him will be Professor Marilyn Booth, who used to be a colleague in Edinburgh, but is now here in order to talk to Alain. Marilyn.
Thank you. And yes, it is a particular pleasure to be sitting here next to Alain, since we've known each other before our Oxford days as colleagues in Edinburgh. Alain, I've known for a long time, but then seeing the list of publications is still just, I've known that of your interest in calligraphy, but to see how much you've done is just truly awesome. Alain has been publishing on the art of Islamic calligraphy since at least 2009, including a book, The Rise of Islamic Calligraphy, in 2010, many works since then, and he right now is working on 2 books, including one catalog. And many really intriguing titles, and one I just want to mention, and I'm hoping that at some point he might tell us a little bit about this, Colored Dots and the Question of Regional Origins in Early Qurans. So, but a very rich and long engagement with Islamic calligraphy. So, Alain, because this has been such an important part of your career, I wonder if you could tell us how you came to study calligraphy and why you have felt it was so important as to engage, to be a central part of your career.
Thank you. That's a good question, actually. For me, this came by complete chance, I would say, but not totally by chance, because being originally from Lebanon, I have seen calligraphy all my life, and it was there at the back of my mind. And then when I came to study here, I actually ended up in a degree on Islamic art, also by coincidence, but I won't tell you that story today. And after the first 2 months, I had to write a piece on an object. And Julian Raby, who was teaching me at the time, told me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I like calligraphy." And he said, "What kind of calligraphy?" And I said, "I like Kufic." I kind of knew what Kufic was, but not very precisely. And so he gave me, or he took me to a Quranic leaf at the Ashmolean Museum, which is from the Quran of Amajur. And over the holidays, I spent times with pictures of this, trying to find something to write. And I started measuring them in all kinds of directions, and found that there was a geometrical structure about these things. And that's when I got hooked, and it continued from there.
Did you have a background in mathematics?
Well, not really, but I did advanced math until at the baccalaureate, so I can count.
So Islamic calligraphy, I think of it as somebody who has studied the Islamic world for a long time. I think of it as a very central art, but it also sometimes seems that it hasn't gotten as much attention overall as some other aspects of Islamic art and architecture. I wonder if you could tell us sort of about the development of calligraphy, but also where it sits in the field of Islamic art and architecture.
Yes,
why it's important.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying here, actually. So the field of Islamic art, the modern field, has mostly developed in Europe and the United States. And I think people have an inherent preference for figural art and to some extent architecture. And there is maybe not such an innate taste for calligraphy in the scholarship as a whole over the last century. There have been wonderful developments in painting, especially in Iran, if you look at the later periods. But it was secondary art, if I may say so, in an Islamic context. And calligraphy is a field which has been developed from the first decades of Islam. And here you have a development of styles over every region of the Islamic world in every century. So you have thousands and thousands of artists that have worked in this field from Senegal to China. What's also interesting is that it's been collected very early. So in the 10th, 11th century, people are already collecting it. And there's an awareness of the history of this art form as well, which starts very, very early. And you begin to get well-formed histories of calligraphers by the 13th, 14th centuries, and shorter things earlier. So it's a very rich field, and wherever you go, whichever period you go into, you're going to reach into the social history of the period as well, because it has such a deep base in society. Mm-hmm. So, but what's exciting, I think, is that in the last 10, 15 years, we have begun to have more specialists in this field working on different periods. So you have this huge continuum, which you could compare to the history of painting in Europe, let's say. And now we're beginning to have some very good studies on some core areas. So we're beginning to get a clearer picture of what was going on, and we still have these huge gaps between what we're starting to know. So I think it's a very exciting and important field.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could sort of give us a taste of the work you do and the texts and images you work on by maybe describing one aspect of calligraphy or one object or one type of thing. Again, as I said earlier, I would also love to hear about colored dots, but whatever you want to talk about.
That's a very technical question.
Okay, all right.
You might regret
maybe
it.
Maybe not.
The first thing that comes to mind is the Quran of Amajur, which is this piece that I started with back in 2000 at the Ashmolean. I think it's a good example, like another, but it's a small double folio which is written on parchment. It's a very smooth parchment, which is white, very well preserved, and you have a page is about this large, and you have 3 lines of script on each page. And between these 2 parchment leaves, which used up a large part of an animal, if you think about the way parchment is done, you have less than 1 verse from the Quran. Right? So the original volume will have been, or the original Quran will have been 60 volumes probably, or 30. And when you start looking, it makes a strong visual impression on you. And it's as if there was a geometry that's there, but that's invisible when you look for traces of any lines, because it's extremely precise. You don't find anything. So that's one aspect of it, which is the way that they codified script and layouts to create this tradition. And the other aspect is that it was endowed to the Great Mosque of Damascus in 876 by Amajur, who was governor of Syria, and was a Turk. By looking at this side of things, you're also getting into social history, and you're able to contextualize the way that the object existed and was used at the time, and the relation in this case between religious scholars, calligraphers that we don't know anything about for this period, and the political authority. So the governor in this very special setting of the Mosque of Damascus.
Fascinating. I mean, that's an interesting example also, because one of the things I've always found fascinating about calligraphy is the fact that, so you have Qur'ans, and then you have objects, you have, calligraphy on copper and brass bowls, and you've also got it as part of monumental architecture. And do you study that relationship? I mean, between the calligraphy, say, on a mosque wall and what is being done on parchment or anything? Is there, or are those really two separate strands that one has to look at separately?
No, they're in most periods they're closely related, because monumental inscriptions usually have to be devised by a calligrapher, and then there are different techniques to project it on, let's say, a wall to create an inscription. So they used in the early modern and modern periods stencils, for instance, to do this type of thing. And you generally have in court patronage in the Islamic world throughout history a concentration of different specialists. So you will have calligraphers, and then you'll have illuminators, and in many periods these people are going to work together on an architectural project as well, so you will get motifs transferred from one medium to another. It begins right in early Islam with the Umayyads, when you have these wonderful mosques and monuments with mosaics all over the walls. But there's a close relationship between these mosaics and what you're going to get on the page of your Quran. And you have an inscription, and you have the Quran, which is set within the context of mosques as well. And this type of thing continues in different forms later. Is that one of the reasons why there are such distinctive, sort of regionally identified styles of calligraphy? I mean, I've always loved what is called Maghribi calligraphy, but it's very, very distinct. It's really different. And does that have to do with the fact that this is partly a monumental, this is connected with monuments? Or is it more that just these styles develop nevertheless? I think, I don't know if it's related to monumental epigraphy. In the first 2-3 centuries of Islam, you have styles that are spread across the Islamic world, it seems. And then gradually you begin to get these regional differentiations. Maghribi emerges quite early. There is new work by Umberto Bongianino on this subject, so we know much more now. He's one of the people I was alluding to earlier. And you have, at the same time, new developments in Iran, and then, so Alia Karame, who's here, has also been working on that. And we have India that soon develops styles of its own. And the question you're asking, which is the dynamics and the reasons why you begin to get these differentiations, is one we haven't really answered yet, I think. We're still trying to map the process at this stage.
And I mean, I have so many questions. I do want to leave time for colleagues' questions, but maybe one final one, since we are talking about regional differences. In the past, you've mentioned to me some work you've done on Chinese Qur'ans. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yes. So, yes, this is a field that interests me. We know that there were Muslims settled in China from at least the early 8th century, so from the 1st century of Islam. And we don't really have early material remains except some ceramics from them. And then you reach the Ming period, let's say the 14th century, and you begin to have fully formed styles of very distinct Chinese calligraphy. But most of what we have is later than this. It's 17th, 18th century. And so we know that something was going on earlier. We know that there's a continuity of settlement, that it seems you have port communities, in particular in the south of China, that have existed there for a long time. And it's a field, again, in which actually we don't have the most basic parameters.
Right. Yeah.
So we don't know, we don't really have reliable dated evidence to use to start understanding that, right, this style of calligraphy, which we call Chinese muhakkak, was already there in 1678. I'm just throwing random dates which don't exist in such a city. So it's a field that's really awaiting someone to come and just do the basic groundwork. It's quite fascinating.
It is. I sense some PhD subjects, future PhD students.
And you also have the phenomenon, it seems, of, well, you have women's mosque in China, and you might also have women calligrapher, so that's another aspect of it.
Can I open the floor? I'm sure that colleagues have yes.
Do some kinds of calligraphy bring out the meaning and the significance of the text more than others, or do people say that they do?
So, well, we have early calligraphy, first of all. So, and that's you have this system in early calligraphy of geometrical and proportional relationships, which I call an architecture of the page. And you have, in the 10th century, so after several centuries of development, texts that say this is a musical art. It's an art of proportion in the sense of using number and ratios to create harmony, which is something that goes back to ancient roots, Plato and Timaeus and the Pythagoreans and so on. So you have some circles in the 10th century that say, but indirectly, that calligraphy reflects the structure of the cosmos. That's the basis of that theory eventually. And the question is, to what extent were earlier generations thinking about it this way as well? And your question also makes me think maybe about late Ottoman calligraphy, where you have portraits of the Prophet that are created non-figuratively with a circle with calligraphy inside and a description of the Prophet, and you have text in a rectangle below. So it looks a bit like a human shape perhaps, but not quite. And when you look at it, you're going to have an image that's conjured in your mind. And the Ottomans, especially in the 19th century, are going to play a lot with the plastic qualities of monumental calligraphy to give it a very striking visual shape as well.
Well, thank you so much for just
Thank you.
giving us a sense of what a rich area of work this is. Thank you.